I'm going to start. And I would like each of you to, and I will repeat it, I would like to ask about your personal connection with the subject of your films, because what I really felt from watching these was your personal connection to your subjects.
I think my personal connection to Aisha was when we were researching and talking to different immigration lawyers looking for a subject for a film about immigration. Aisha was the only woman who came forward with her story, and what we had noticed when we talked to a lot of different subjects was there's a lot of hesitance to talk about the conflicts that they endured. There's a lot of fear that the government still might come after them. And as soon as I saw Aisha on film talking about her story, I saw how incredibly brave she was, how everything that she did was for her children and to get her children back. And I immediately felt like I was connected with her and I understood her, and I wanted other people to feel the same.
I would agree with all of those things. The other part I'll add is that the personal connection extended. You know, when you make a film about someone and you are entrusted with the intimate details of their lives and you see and feel the love they have for their family, and you can respect that everyone deserves to be with the people that they love, and you see that as her like sole purpose in life. We, you know, kept in touch with the family after the filming. We were certainly shocked by Aisha's subsequent passing away. We knew she was very ill, but it was still a shock, and we very much kept in touch with the family. In fact, I remember Joyce and I speaking shortly after she passed away, that in a very real sense, we felt like Aisha had made sure she'd set her family up in a way with different people and organizations, but including us. Like, we had a responsibility to kind of look after her family after that by keeping in touch. And so it is a very strong personal connection from when we met her until today.
Barry?
Yeah. Well, as a gay man, I grew up in an era of the 50s and 60s where any image of a gay or lesbian person on the screen was so ugly and so negative, and either the butts of jokes, or they were desperate, suicidal, pathetic. They would hang themselves, jump off bridges. And this constant stream of negative imagery creates a perception for anyone who's struggling with their sexuality of being somebody who's unwelcome in society, who is to be scorned or humiliated. And you know, you grow up seeing these images, and since we derive so much of our perceptions from film, and I think we'll all agree to that, you create this self-image, which it can be very debilitating. I felt at a point in my career, I had done a number of kind of glossy Hollywood movies, that I was reaching a point where I really wanted to dig inside myself, and I felt it was incumbent on me to be able to use whatever skill and talent I had as a screenwriter to maybe change the perception of what gay people were on the screen. So that because I was a screenwriter, that was, you know, what I did. I tried to create a narrative whereby we would see a emergence of a gay man who finally accepts his sexuality and ultimately is happy and proud and gratified by it. So that by doing so, it would not only change the perception of gay people struggling with their own sexuality, but project to the world an image of gay people that are not these desperate, pathetic, suicidal characters. And this was not an easy film to get off the ground, but it took Sherry Lansing, who was the first woman head of production at 20th Century Fox at a major studio, and Claire Townsend, who was head of development. It took two women to get this film made, and bravo to them for doing so. But it was the first film to ever really show a positive image of a gay person on the screen. And as a result, I got a lot of response from gay people and straight people around the country just thanking me for an image that allowed them to feel some sense of pride, finally, on the screen.
Thank you. Amanda?
So in the case of 8 Borders, 8 Days, which is about a single mom, I had no plan to make a film until I met the main character, and it was sort of the connection that I had to her and how impressed I was by her character. I mean, when you see her in the film, she is among the most resourceful, clever, driven people that you'll ever meet in your life. And, you know, I had made short videos for NGOs for many years before I made this, and I was thinking I would do the same thing in this case. And you know, I convinced her to let me, we'd met for 1 hour, and I convinced her to let me fly to Greece and film with her for a couple of days during the refugee crisis, the exodus to Europe a few years ago. And when I got to the island, you know, there were 20,000 people trapped, and, you know, I said this after my screening, but she was the only one I saw in sight that knew what to do, that wasn't sitting around sort of you know, waiting for a signal. She was sort of taking life into her own hands. And I thought, you know, I have to follow this woman. She had applied to the US. We did not accept her. She, you know, she is the best case scenario for refugees, and I wanted to know what is going to happen with this woman. And, you know, when you're traveling through Europe, walking, bus, train, whatever, with smugglers, and it's just this crazy situation, you become very close very fast. And it was my connection to her, I guess, that, you know, made me want to continue following her story and make this film, and today to share her story, because she defies every expectation that people have, I think, of refugees, of women from the Arab world, and she's basically just a strong single mother in an extreme situation.
Mr. Amal, you are the subject of the film, so I'm going to ask you a little bit different question. What was it like to be the subject of a film like this? Because you're usually behind the scenes, and this really puts you out there front and center.
What was it like to be the subject of the film? First, I'd like to congratulate everybody on this panel for the depth and breadth of the work you've been doing, and how inclusive it is, and how much people can, I hope, learn from it. You know, Jim knocked on I didn't know Jim, so I could say this man knocked on my door one day and said, "Hello, my Jim, it's Jim Demo. I'd like to do a documentary about some of your life and work." And I looked at him in amazement and said, "Please come in." I essentially agreed to do the documentary because I spent half my life trying to raise money, and in the kind of work that I do, foundations don't fund this type of activity. It's either strange, or it's dangerous, or they unpredictable in terms of the outcomes, and foundations like to know what the outcomes will be when you apply for a grant. And in the kind of work I do, you never know what the outcome is going to be, or whether the outcome might be 10 years from now rather than today or tomorrow. Once I agreed, I gave James full access to my life. I don't mind people knowing about my life. I have nothing to hide. Probably some things I am ashamed of during my behavior as an alcoholic. But again, the truth is the truth. And after I gave him access, he followed me around to the various places I would work in, and whether it was in Mitrovica, in Kosovo, in Nigeria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Northern Ireland, and a couple of other places. I became totally unaware of his presence, absolutely unaware of his presence. He was not intrusive in any way at all. And I didn't supply him with the names of my friends or anybody I knew. I said, it's up to you to find out who they are, and if you want to interview them, but I'm not any part of that process. I never looked at anything. I didn't see the trailer which he used to raise funding on Kickstart. I never asked him about the documentary until the documentary opened. And I use occasions like this not to look at myself again on the screen, but to the questions and answers that follow, in the hope that I may be able to change the views or behaviors or even the thoughts of some people in the audience. And most effectively, it has been with alcoholics. I don't think I have been at a showing across 4 continents where somebody or a group have come up to me and kind of whisper into my ear, sober for 7 years, sober for 3 months. Always a message of recovery. And I think in that regard, that may be the most effectiveness of the documentary. Thank you.
Sober for 4 years. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. O'Malley. Jim, your personal connection to the man sitting next to you?
Yeah, it's it's. Porg made a joke when he heard this was the question. Porg has a little trouble hearing, so I repeat the questions to him, and he said, "Say it's evolving, our relationship," which is in the best way. I had heard of Porg. He was in Iraq, and he was bringing the Northern Irish chief negotiators and the South African chief negotiators to meet with the Iraqis, and I knew I had to meet him. I knew it was a meeting that potentially would change my life. It has. And Porg and I met in the back of a library in Brookline, and he told me his life story, which one thing more incredible than the next. And I knew almost immediately that the film was going to be an intimate story because Porg derives his peacemaking work from the recovery model. One alcoholic is in the best position to help another, as one culture in conflict is in the best position to help another. So I knew there was this direct nexus to his personal life. So I think over time you build a relationship. We both, I think, are so singular in our work that we developed an intimacy over time, and I think it shows in the film. Yeah, I think documentary filmmaking, it does take time. I'm happy to hear Porg say that he didn't sense the cameras around him. I think that's something that does take time. I think the other subjects in the film, particularly when we went into conflict zones, were very aware of the cameras at first, but ultimately, because they trusted Porg, trusted me, and that was really, I think, the biggest help in making a film like this, because these people are in intense conflict, and who is this person with the camera filming these conversations? So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yes, it does. And finally, E.G., your personal connection to the subject of your film.
Well, I'm a father. I have 2 young sons, 6 and 8. So with the the rash of killing of unarmed black men, it becomes very personal, and you live. I'd like to think that they're too young to deal with anything like that, but they're not. Some of these incidents have happened with kids as young as 6, 8, 10, 12. We usually think of 16 to early 20s when these incidents happen, but that's not the case. So the film focuses on a mother, but in some ways I think I'm writing out my own fears and concerns, and so that's a big part of the film. The inspiration came from an article by a woman named Faye Wells that was in the Washington Post about an incident that she had with a neighbor who called the police on her, telling them that she was burglarizing the house, which was her own house. So I read that story and it just stuck with me, and I couldn't let it go. And so I ended up writing it as a short story and then adapting it into a stage reading and then a screenplay. Using that as an inspiration and trying to figure out, what do you do as a parent? And that's a lot of what I've been dealing with the last couple years. Perhaps preparing myself for as they get older. And, it starts early. About 2 weeks ago, I was actually stopped by the police with my 2 sons in the car. And so, I wasn't expecting to have the conversation this early, much less in a car with the police behind you. But it was a very nerve-wracking moment with the police there, my 2 sons there, wondering what's going on and watching, wondering what I was, just keeping an eye on what I'm doing, and that's how they learn, so they're watching to see what you do, and so I'm trying to deal with the situation at the same time, being mindful of my kids in the back seat, and we know about Philando Castile and all that, and so a lot of things running through my head at the same time. So, and talking to them about keeping your hands present and on the wheel and sitting still and waiting and not moving, not doing anything in the back seat, and it was a simple stop. I didn't have my lights on because it was raining, even though it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I didn't think there was a need for having my lights on, but I guess that's the law. But these things start from very simple, banal incidents, and so that's it's a very personal, real concern.
Okay. And I'm going to start with you this time, E.G. We're going to get back down this way. What message do you hope your film can convey in this current political climate?
That we all are carrying a lot of things. We all have a lot that we're dealing with, but we all have a right to live. We have a right to feel secure. Have a right to, the story focuses on a mother who, in the face of all this police brutality, takes her sons around a neighborhood that they just moved into, going to the neighbors and saying, we belong here. So if you see us here, don't call the police, and don't, cause any harm to my kids because they belong here just like you. And so, to me, that's the message. We all belong here. We all have a right to be here and to live life to live life fully without fear and concern and constantly looking over our shoulders or constantly living in fear. I just saw yesterday, I think last night, there was a post in Houston. There's a family that the police has been called on them 20 times because a neighbor, every time that they have guests, every time they play music, the neighbor calls the police. So much so that the police have become friends with with the family. And the police shows up and the family goes, "Hey, how you doing?" and goes back to their card game. And, and so there's a lot of fear mongering that happens through the news and through media. But we're all the same, We all are pursuing life. We all are pursuing to take care of our families and take care of our kids and leave something better for them. And so we just need to recognize each other's humanity, even more so than ever. So that would be it.
And Jim, what message do you hope your film can convey in this current political climate?
Well, initially, I will be honest that when I made the film, I wasn't really thinking about social impact. I don't really necessarily view myself as a social impact filmmaker, and I think when you're doing a very personal profile of someone and you start thinking about the peacemaking and you start thinking about other things, it can often drift into a hagiography or something that isn't really that truthful. So I was really interested in understanding why Porig did the work, given some of the extremes he's gone to in these places, and certainly average people that are happy going to their job every day and barbecues on the weekend don't go to Iraq and say, I could change that. And I thought that was fascinating. Having said that, you know, it took 6 years to make the film, and the world's a very different place than when I started the film, and we played the film in Sheffield with the backdrop of Brexit. We've played the film in Bogota, Colombia with the backdrop of the FARC peace deal. We've played the film in St. Louis as part of a divided intercities initiative. A lot of people from Ferguson came. And Porig is an example of someone who's been able to reach across divides in communities that are not only at odds politically, but are at odds at times with extreme violence. So I think, you know, looking at the United States and the most divisive election I think we've ever had, and certainly a time of deep division within our country that I think could at some point have significant flares of violence, I think we have to look at some of the messages of the other conflicts that Porig brings his years of work in Northern Ireland, South Africa. There are lessons from other societies that have lived through conflict, and Porig is sort of the person who creates that dynamic, bringing these communities together. Beyond that, I think the thing that has surprised me, and Porig's already touched on, is the fact that this film is sort of shows the struggle of addiction in a way that I think is incredibly honest, and that it is an ongoing process, not a destination. You don't just find recovery and say, I'm healed and it's all over. Porig's extremely honest about that in the film, but also that you can be in recovery and struggling with recovery and still be an incredibly productive person, that your life isn't over while you deal with your own problems with recovery. So those are the two things I think. I think, you know, reaching over the divide, I think we have to figure out a way to do it, even as we oppose really, I think, harmful policies, but also to the people that are the supporters on the other side, be able to reach over that divide. And then also a message of recovery is a process. I think those are the two things.
Mr. O'Malley?
Porig, what do you hope the film might convey?
Three or four things, and let me begin with the United States. We showed this documentary at a festival in St. Louis, and there were some people there from Ferguson, and after the showing, we began to talk how possibly the model could be in some way refigured so that it could apply to Ferguson. And the model is really very simple. It says that one divided society is in the best position to help another. But underlying that is that I must know who you are, and you must know who I am, if we are to connect with each other and be able to have a conversation. And Ferguson, and not just Ferguson, each Richmond in Baltimore, every other place where there's been trouble in the last couple of years. It's because the people who live on interfaces between Afro-American communities and white communities in Northern Ireland, between Catholics and Protestants, in Jerusalem, Palestinians or Jews, is they don't know each other. None of them have lived in the other's community. None of them know what the ordinary life of the people are in the other community. So we were looking at a model of taking a group of young Afro-American youth and bringing them into the white suburbs of Ferguson, where they would live with families, for a week, and they would go around and see what people talked about, see what the kids did, see what the problems of average families were, and kind of come out and say, God, they're just the same as I am. And then counterpoint that with a visit of a number of young white people into African American community and have them live with people for a week and go through the very same process. Even it's down to the little thing of, what do you watch on television? I watch that too. My team is this, your team is that. And by expanding on that kind of model, people can learn how they live. And if they learn how they live, they can learn how to deal with their differences. And that applies to all conflicts, whether they're personal conflicts, whether they're ethnic conflicts, whether they're national conflict. We, quote unquote, other the other person. And even if somebody had, like in this country like now, it's polarized between, let's say, Trump supporters and non-Trump supporters. And sometimes non-Trump supporters, liberals, I would say, for the most part, when they look at a Trump supporter, they kind of hang something like Trumpism on the person. And the Trump person kind of hangs the label of, far left liberal on the other. So they look at each other through ideological terms, but each person has two personalities. You've got the ideological person and the human person. And what you must do is ignore the ideological person and deal with the human person. And it's only when we do that can see each other as human beings bereft of any ideology. Because do you know what? Even a racist has problems with his family, with his kids, with his school, with his work. All the same problems that a non-racist has. And we must be able to see that before we can do anything about it. Thank you.
And Amanda, what message do you hope your film can convey in this current political climate?
Well, I guess first and foremost, I hope that it doesn't so much as convey a message, but just provide a human story in what is very often the refugee crisis. Very, very rarely do we hear the individual stories behind it. So I hope that first it's just a look into a personal story that can start a dialogue based on a deeper understanding of who this other is. And I guess in terms of message, this woman's story and the story of so many other people fleeing war, it seems so far away and so abstract and like, oh, these people must be used to this. This must be some other experience. And actually, many of the people in Syria, I mean, pretty much everyone in Syria, woke up one day and found themselves in this situation. They lived a normal life before the war started, before the revolution started. And they found themselves in these extreme circumstances. And actually what you see is just a mother who maybe here the equivalent scenario is she's a single mom and she has to work 3 jobs to support her kids and is struggling in finances and et cetera, but this is just happens to be the extreme circumstances that she woke up to one day. And the choices she's made and the consequences are something that I think so many of us would probably make the exact same choice and face, the hard decision. Do you put your kids in a raft and go across the sea? I mean, you don't do that unless it's your last possible chance. So I think it's just a way to understand that these are people woke up to these kinds of choices. They didn't choose this life. And it's something we should all be able to empathize with, I would hope.
And something that kind of struck me too was it humanized people who have been pretty much dehumanized.
Yeah.
And you deal with, you actually see what they're dealing with and the conditions that are, we treat animals better than these people are being treated as refugees. So.
Yeah, and I hope that there's, it's not all tragedy. There's moments of humor, there's moments of playfulness, and I think I'd like the film to remind us that these are humans. These are people who, still like to laugh and play and dance, and the tragedy isn't everything.
Barry?
Yeah, well, we've certainly come a long way as a society since the film came out in terms of LGBT acceptance and self-acceptance. And I know after the impact the film made, it was groundbreaking in many ways, but particularly that it was very hard and rare to see a Hollywood film where a gay or lesbian character would kill themselves or be so, self-hating that they just couldn't exist anymore. But at the same time, there still is a degree of homophobia that exists, and there's still young people who are wrestling with their own sexuality. So hopefully, the film has a transcendent power and universality that isn't dated, that just says that, hey, you are able to find gratification and self-acceptance with your sexuality, and I think that message will still resonate.
Thank you, Barry. And my assistant is a gay man, and he said to me when I was watching it, he said, that's the first film that I ever saw that made me feel I was okay, that I could have a normal life
well,
as a young
that's
man.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Emily?
Sure. So it's funny, I maybe naively hadn't spent a lot of time before we met Aisha and started talking a lot about the themes of this film and the things that we were researching. I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about what a person's experience is like once they are given asylum or they, gain refugee status. I'd thought a lot about like how tragic it would be to have to seek that out and how hard it would be waiting to know if you were approved or able to work freely. And so this experience taught me, and I hope that it can share with others, that first of all, it can take forever to gain those pieces of independence and the freedom that we all feel within ourselves that we have to wait for someone else to give us sometimes. But that after that is achieved, the road is still long and it's still unknown, just like all of our roads are. And I really hope that people can really recognize that we do all deserve to be with the people we love. That's kind of the motto of the organization that helped reunite Aisha with her kids. It's why they don't make a penny off of any of the donations they get. Everything goes to funding flights for people who simply cannot afford to see the people they love, much less a lot of times deal with all the legalities around it. So we too wanted to create share a human story of someone that we might not know anything about. We might not seek out a story of the person who, cleans up in the hotel or has a great job at, a university. Like we all have these varied backgrounds and have survived a lot. And for us, I don't think you hear a ton of those stories about refugees. We're starting to hear more of them. It was amazing to see Amanda's film yesterday as well. Really inspired me. So I hope that this film can help everybody remember that sense of connection we all crave with the people we love.
I would just add on to what Emily was saying about everyone deserving to be with the people that they love. I think one of the things we realized when we were making this film is no matter what your opinion is on immigration reform or the world refugee crisis, I think we can all agree that families should be together and families belong together. And most of us see this as a basic human right. And for so many immigrants and so many refugees in the world, this has been a right that's been taken away from them. So it's just something that we hope that people can think about and be aware of as they start to form their opinions around immigration reform and the refugee crisis. Because so many of these people have had this right taken away from them because of circumstances outside of their control, whether it be war or conflict or immigration law. So it's just something we're hoping people will consider.
Thank you. And I know many of you probably have questions. There are microphones that are located throughout the theater if you'd like to ask a question. If not, I'll keep asking questions, which can be dangerous. So would anyone like, yes, please state your name and you can address all or one of the panel.
Hi, I'm Olivia Roman with UCF, and thank you so much for showing your films and making them and having the confidence and the brave personality to do it. I just want to ask, was there a moment that you guys cherished most in the filmmaking process? And just hear about that.
A motive? Can you give a little bit more information
A
about
moment, a moment you cherished most,
Oh, a
like
moment.
making
Okay.
the film.
Yep. Joyce, you want to start?
Oh, I mean, I think the whole process for us was something that we cherished because we got extremely close to our subject and to her family. And as Emily said, we maintained that connection. I think that when we were interviewing Aisha and when she met us, she allowed us the privilege of having access to her life and knowing some of her secrets that she so carefully guarded for such a long time. And that was an honor. I think that she told us a lot of things and she allowed us into her world, and that feeling of trust with someone who trusts that you're going to do the right thing with their story, or that you're going to tell it and hopefully will impact other people. I think that felt like a great privilege and responsibility that we were honored to have.
And just to add to that, it may sound obvious, but the reunion with her daughters, which we were obviously there for, we weren't physically, we had to send a small crew for the reunion with her son, but when we saw her joy and her daughter's joy in that moment of being together for the first time after 12 years of being apart and only being able to speak on the phone, and seeing the daughters recognize what their mother had been through, that she had guarded from them about how sick she had been. So very overwhelming moment. Also, of course, we wanted to make sure we were getting all the right angles and everything, but a lot of that goes out the window. I mean, it was just incredibly special. So it was really moving, of course.
Well, for me, it was without question the number of letters I received, hundreds and hundreds of letters from gay men and women around the country who were moved to the point where thanking me and saying that this film allowed me to come out to my family, to my friends, and to know that as a writer, as a filmmaker, as a screenwriter, you can use your ability to affect that kind of a change in a person's life is pretty powerful.
Amanda?
I mean, I'm struggling to think of a moment actually making the film. It was a difficult film, and it was a difficult filming process, especially since in this situation and so many refugee stories, there's not like a moment of like, we made it. Like there's not like a moment where you've crossed the finish line. So there's joyous moments along the way, but there's never like it's over, the relief. It hasn't happened yet, at least. But I would say after finishing the film, we've been doing very small community screenings in areas where there's very high numbers of refugees, especially ones that have been recently resettled. And seeing the response of the American communities it's really easy to get swept up in the negativity and the fear of what's happening right now, but I think it's also really important to look at the reaction to this, and there are so many people who have been mobilized and motivated by the things that are happening in politics, that to see the positive steps that people are taking. I mean, people who maybe used to like something on Facebook are now actively looking for ways to get involved and affect change. And after seeing this film, somebody raised their hand and offered 5 jobs to refugees in a town in upstate New York. Dozens of tutors, English teachers, just people wanting to get involved. And I think that it's still important to look at these moments despite the sort of darkness happening.
Corey, any special moments during filming?
What? Oh.
Was there special moments when we were filming that you remember? Anything that you want to?
Both of them I was unaware of because my mind was concentrated on something else. And the first was in Kosovo, where there are deep divisions between the Albanian-speaking population and the Serbian-speaking population, and the town we were dealing with, Mitrovica, is right on the border and the Serbs do not accept that they belong to Kosovo, and we had a confrontation with the police at the border. They were armed, and they were Serbian, and they did not want us or allow us to go over the bridge, over the border, so as to speak, into Kosovo properly. It was only later that I found that James had, in fact, caught that on the screen. And the second one was that is one of my, I won't say favorite parts, but it says a lot. We had people from Jerusalem, that is, Jews from West Jerusalem, from the municipality, and Palestinians from East Jerusalem. And it was incredibly difficult to get them to come. But once they came and they discovered that their narrative, their conflict, and they were not unique, that there were other conflicts just as awful as their own conflicts, they relaxed. But at one point in a discussion like this, the man from East Jerusalem said, "My name is Muhammad, I come from East Jerusalem." And then a woman from the municipality said, "My name is Edna, and I come from East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem." She was making the distinction that Palestinians don't recognize West Jerusalem as being any part of their territory. And the last part, where I have a conversation with God, and I come out on the short end of that conversation, and he got that on film.
He gave that speech at Boston College, so thank you to Boston College for filming that. We use it in the film. I mean, what a privilege to travel the world with Poreg and enter rooms that I'd have no business being in otherwise. I always sort of look at the camera as a passport to the world, but also, you know, I hear a lot about and see it in a lot of the work here. It just builds such empathy, being able to be up close with people and share their stories. So, I mean, yeah, we were in all sorts of both quiet and crazy situations in Kosovo and in Northern Ireland and Iraq and Northern Nigeria. But I really think the times that I cherish most is, you know, me and Poreg would talk so much that I wouldn't set up the lights and the tripod anymore, and I just have the camera on my lap. And we just have these long talks about life, and, you know, I have hours and hours of footage of Poreg and I just in his this little room in his apartment with the camera on my lap that I would just turn on and off as we talked about these sort of sometimes very broad things and sometimes these very personal, intimate things. And I think it's those moments that I cherish the most. They're the most meaningful to me.
I just couldn't stop talking.
I can relate to that, sir.
I think with ours, you know, we ended up filming in a neighborhood. Originally, we were going to film in our own neighborhood, but we ended up filming in another neighborhood, and I think the neighbors being so open to us using their you know, their places. You know, just and opening their doors, you know, it's never easy to have, you know, film people just come into your to your house and your yard and kind of take over for the day. And so we really appreciated that, and in fact, this Saturday we're having a screening with the neighborhood, and so they'll be seeing the film for the first time, and I'm a little nervous about it. You know, I hope they feel that they're, well, I don't know. I don't know if they'll feel like their neighborhood's represented well. So they didn't read the script. None of them asked to read the script, or you know, they kind of got a general idea what the film was about. So I'm hoping that they don't take it personally. But other than that, I think it was just the process. I try to use a theater process when I make films, and so you know, the group of us that made it, you know, we really kind of became a little family, and I just appreciate everybody being invested, because it's not it's not an easy issue to deal with, and people have to come out of themselves and sort of out of the walls that we build around ourselves. And so I really appreciated the team that I worked with.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Mike Ferraro. Sorry, that was really loud. First off, I have a comment and then a question. Joyce and Emily, I saw your film yesterday, and I don't get to say this too often, but it devastated me in the best possible way. I love even seeing that clip again. Just it's so good and so sad, but optimistic. Really good, really great stuff. So thank you for sharing that with us. And secondly, for Amanda, you went on kind of a long and treacherous journey with this family. How challenging is it for you to separate your job as a filmmaker from your own humanity and wanting to help this family succeed in their journey to getting where they need to go?
Really hard. You know, you can't be in the middle of nowhere and not become a team. I mean, I couldn't have had any sort of distance. I mean, we sort of became a team trying to move through these borders and across these countries, and I just happened to have a camera. But you know, there are many instances. You know, I would have put the camera down in a second and called the whole thing off if there was any sort of actual physical danger to them after the raft trip. But there are moments where I could have changed their journey. You know, having someone with an American passport and a camera could have changed everything. And there were moments, you know, maybe I'm not supposed to say this, but there was a moment in Greece where the little girl, the 7-year-old, got separated from her family. Now, no one can communicate. They don't speak English, and the Greek police didn't speak Arabic. And I don't, like, she's resourceful. She would have figured something out, but I was able to leave their line, go get the police, tell them, you know, there's a 7-year-old girl missing. You need to go reunite them. And, you know, I wasn't filming that because it was more important that we find the girl. But it is hard when, you know, they don't need to stay in it. We could have gotten a hotel, and with my passport, I could have put them in a hotel, and you can't change everything about it, but there was never a moment where I would have let them be in danger that I could have changed.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to answer how challenging is it to separate the film from yourself? Your own feelings? Anybody else want to? No? Okay. Next question.
Hello, my name is Kyle Parker. This is a question for the panel, and all of you have kind of made films with very real world impact, and I was curious if these are the type of films that you thought that you would be making when you became a filmmaker, and also if these are sort of the type of films that you want to continue making in the future. Just
Let's start with, I guess that's to the entire panel, so E.G., you want to start?
Well, I started out as an experimental filmmaker, and I knew that eventually I would make narrative films. Subject matter, no, I didn't necessarily think I would make this type of film, but I think, you know, I think as an artist you have to trust. You know, I always say the art tells me what it's going to be, and if I don't know how to do that particular thing, I go out and learn it. And, you know, because when the art tells you what to do, it can be hard to escape from it. And so I usually just try to follow my instincts in terms of what projects I'm going to work on and what work I'm going to do. And like I said, I read this very, you know, like first thing in the morning, and it stayed with me, you know, and I couldn't get it out of my head, and spent the whole day actually writing it in my head, and then wrote it down. And so I wasn't expecting them to make it, because it just came spur of the moment. But once it came, I knew that I had to make it. So.
Well, my film before this was a comedy, and it was something I wrote and directed with some pretty amazing people in it that I cherished that experience as well. With documentary, I view documentary very much an exploration when you're filming. Certainly there were themes that I would think about as I was making the film. I think documentary, unlike narrative fiction, is the writing sort of happens at the end of the process, and the ideas about structure and things along those lines. And so it's kind of inverted from narrative fiction filmmaking. But every film is pretty much, I think, what I think. You know, it's sort of that I'm happy with how it's turned out because it's the expression of that process. Yeah, so I like to keep myself open creatively whenever I start anything. I don't want to make too many decisions early on that puts me in a direction that may not lead where I want to go. I want to try to really stay open in the process.
And I guess to Mr. O'Malley, it would be more like, did you ever think that you would be the subject of a documentary?
Did you ever think you'd be a subject of a documentary?
No.
Okay, to the next one. The next, Amanda. And the question is, did you ever think this was the kind of film that you would be making?
Yeah. I knew that if I ever made, a feature film, it would certainly, the issue takes precedent for me over the form in which it's told. I studied journalism and I worked for Human Rights Watch for a long time, so I've been involved in activism. But I always thought, if you provide all the information, that's the best way to be an activist. People just need the information. And actually, through this process, I've realized, the information, especially around the refugee issue, is out there. People either choose to read it and they're already aware, or they've chose not to read it and not to seek it out. So what I tried to do is do the exact opposite of what I had previously thought, and provide almost no information and actually make it one person's story and make it immersive and more of an experience. And if you want to seek out the news and the facts around it, I hope that encourages you to do it. But I think, there's so much information out there. There has to be other ways to engage people.
Mary?
Yeah, no, the answer is no. I never thought I would be writing this movie, because prior to this movie, I had done, a lot of big Hollywood movies, big stars, Elizabeth Taylor and Maggie Smith and Goldie Hawn, Raquel Welch. But this film gave me a certain sense of responsibility, almost a need to write more, deeper and probe more provocative aspects of the human condition. I then followed this up with a film that I did with Ken Russell called Crimes of Passion, which is a very kind of a dark, probing examination of sexuality too. So this kind of sense of responsibility has followed me all through my career, even up until the last film I did was 2 years ago. I wrote and produced a film that was written as a comedy mystery, but we decided to cast the entire cast with African American actors in roles that were not race specific, and I wanted to make a point with that as well. So, yeah, I didn't expect to, and I'm, turned out to be very gratifying.
Emily, is this the kind of film you expected to make as a filmmaker?
In a way or a sense, I kind of realized a love of film and people telling compelling stories and helping shift public consciousness or make you consider a perspective that you might not have. I recognized all of these things that I found really compelling when I was in college. I wanted to go into film and make films and make documentaries. But the way I decided in my rational mind at the time to do that was kind of fell into a job in advertising. And I thought that would give me a chance to quickly learn production, and I could go off and make, whatever amazing films I wanted to make. And, that was in 2000, and I'm still working in advertising. And it has allowed me the ability to learn, yes, and learn from amazing filmmakers, but also gave me a chance to make this film in between other jobs, to meet Joyce, with whom I made the film. And it is still very much something in my heart that I do want to help shift consciousness on a level where we just consider perspectives we might not have. We move toward a sense of connection with other people. We consider other people's feelings. And that's what I've always wanted to do with film, whether documentary or narrative. I've always had a real love and appreciation of someone being able to create a story and share that based on, yes, their own experience, but with their imagination. So love to do more of that as well.
Joyce?
I think I didn't have any expectations going into this process thinking I was going to make a certain type of film or what that was going to be like. I think I just took a topic that was deeply personal to me, and then, which is probably the case for so many documentary filmmakers, you search for a subject or you stumble upon a subject, and then you go on a journey with that subject. And so I think I let that take over, and I've described this to many people in the process of making this film, but at times I almost felt like it wasn't Emily and I that were making it. The film had an energy of its own. It was going to make itself, and we were just along for the ride. And so that's very much how I experienced the process. And for what's next, I'm not sure. It was deeply satisfying, especially some of the themes we touched upon. So again, I don't have any expectations of what we're going to go into next, and I hope that, that same experience will happen again, because it was really cool to be a part of.
Next.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have about 15 minutes left, so we probably have time for another maybe 2 or 3 questions.
Hi, my name is Zainab Merchant, and I'm from Zainab Writes, and I have Marvin from Kino Films. We basically partnered together to create a motion picture this summer, and we're really inspired by what you all have done, especially the films about refugees. That's kind of what our film will be about, and bringing the humanness, like you guys talked about, to what these people are experiencing. So we have 2 questions because we're 2 people. And my first question is to James. You talked a little about the Kickstarter. How do you create an effective fundraising campaign to get the budget you require to make a film?
Well, are you doing a documentary or a fiction film?
A fiction.
Okay. Well, there are different tools that filmmakers use. Crowdfunding is one of them. We did 2 Kickstarter campaigns during the making of the film, one for a trip to Northern Ireland, that was a small one, and one post-production one as well. We had other funding from the Sundance Institute, from the Left Foundation, a few others that we used as well. So we did it piecemeal, as I think many documentaries in the United States do. I don't know if I'm the person to ask about social fundraising, crowdfunding, but I would just say that the successful campaigns that I've known about, and ours was successful, I don't know if I'd give myself an A on how I ran it, but is that the success of the campaign is decided before you even begin it. Have all the preparation of the people that you're sending your email lists to, that people know you're doing it. There's all sorts of great information online. I actually, if you give me your email, I can send you a couple of links to things that I looked at. But yeah, crowdfunding is effective. It's a lot of work. It's not something that you just say, here it is, world. It's something you have to tend throughout the process, and you have to have a lot of really good people along for the ride with you to make it successful. And I wish you luck in funding it. I think it's, you know, any way to make the film is I think a valid way to do it, and certainly crowdfunding is one of the tools.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to that as advice to it? No? Okay.
We didn't use crowdfunding to make our film, but we got into Sundance and, you know, independent filmmakers, we didn't have any money to go. But we were able to raise $6,000 to actually go. And I think the main thing that helped with that and being able to do that was just make it as personal as possible. You know, make it connect to you, and you know, because we had done another Kickstarter before that, and we raised like $500. But I don't think people had as much of a connection to that other campaign. And even though it was something that was important to us, we did, it wasn't as personal. So I think a key thing is to really talk about what it means to you, and what it'll mean to your life and your work. And then also really connect with people that you know. And then as it grows within that, they will support it and continue to spread it. But starting with close key number of people, and then doing that, because there's so much crowdfunding that does happen, that you can get inundated with it, and so it's hard to figure out which one to support. So really think about what it means to you and what it means to the people that you're trying to connect with.
Thank you. My second question is that obviously this film is, I mean, we came up with this idea because we have a certain message to get across, just like any other activist. How do you, and this question is directed to Amanda and anyone else can chip in, but how did you, I guess, effectively target, have the message or the film target the audience that you wanted to hear your message, which would be like they would be unlikely to watch our film just because of the material and the kind of message of humanity that we're giving for refugees. So how do you get that film to be seen by the people who would most likely not see it?
Well, I think first of all, you have to be true to the material that you have and the ideas that you have. You can't, it has to naturally in some way speak to who you know, you can't twist what you have too much. But I think it is really important from day one to keep in mind who might be interested in this. And I'm based in Beirut, and many of the much of the film world that I have access to there is based in Europe, and the European experience versus the Middle Eastern experience versus the American experience of immigration, and Syrian immigrants in particular, is so different. So I originally tried to strike some sort of middle ground and please everyone, and actually what I had, the material I had, couldn't do that. Europe knows what this journey looks like, and America doesn't yet, for the most part. So in the end, the material I had naturally fit for an American audience, and so I think it's just a matter of thinking of particular outlets, particular venues, really from early on engaging people who have a different perspective, who aren't so immersed in your material, who can help you really think about how to bring it to life and make sure that, you know, with crowdfunding, you get, one of the advantages, if you do it well, you get a base of support from very early on, and you raise awareness that your film exists, and then people can start helping you think about how to bring it to life when you are ready. But you know, if you love what you're doing and you love the material you have, you're going to have an audience. It's just a matter of brainstorming and thinking of how to reach them.
One thing, you also need to get a good PR firm who is sensitive to your intention and can target your audience.
Yeah. Yeah, and who appreciates what you appreciate about your film.
Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you so much for being here and for the work you do. I wanted to ask if there's a particular injustice that you witnessed or the subject of that inspired you to get into this work, and what gave you the strength to fight against it.
I'm going to let who wants to start that one? Mix it up a little bit.
When I was younger, and shortly after I moved to the Twin Cities, I was part of a residency with some organizations in the Twin Cities, and it was with a theater group out of Los Angeles called the Hittite Empire, and that was a critical process for me, in the sense of in terms of my art making, and eventually just became my work in my life. And one of the key things that we learned was to look within your community and see what's missing, what isn't being dealt with, what isn't being talked about. You know, what things that concern you, and look at how to address those. You know, it's not necessarily about finding a solution, but how do you get engaged with what's going on in your community? If it's an issue that's not being talked about, raise it and talk about it. Do work around it. You know, if it's a problem, you know, it might be as simple as, you know, volunteering with an organization. It doesn't necessarily have to become something artistic, but that was the foundation of what we were taught, and we ended up creating a theater piece, and from there, you know, I used that as a model of both in terms of activism and in terms of artistically, and started different arts organizations and nonprofit organizations, and did those for 10 years. You know, put art on hold for 10 years to do that, and then eventually went back to making work. But for me, that was really a turning point for me. My plan was to go to LA and you know, make films, but that kind of changed my direction.
Anyone, a particular injustice that your film brought to light? Anyone else?
I'll just add that the organization that we talked about, Hello Vuelo, that helps reunite families, they work with low-income families who, like we said, cannot afford to, well, they can hardly afford to pay rent or, God forbid, a medical expense, much less seeing the people that they're sending money home to many times. So that, I think, when we learned about the work they were doing, we realized is an injustice, and why can't we all as a society sort of help that along? And I think some of that came from, in my childhood, my parents exposed me early on to people in different communities that were dealing with real poverty. We certainly did not have a lot of money when I was growing up, but it opened my perspective. I started to understand that things are different all over, in the town next door, the house next door, and that something that was said earlier too, like everybody's still experiencing the same joys, the same hopes, the same dreams, just in different ways, and we can all kind of recognize that in each other. So I think when we heard about the work they were doing, I kind of brought that to light, and we wanted to help share out that message.
Anyone else?
Well, I mean, you know, I was saying the injustice of just the rampant homophobia that existed. It was certainly more external and outlying not outlined, but prevalent in society at the time. Now it's not quite as rampant and it's more guarded, but at the time, this was an era where you had the lovely Anita Bryant, if you recall, from the state, who was on the march trying to suppress gay rights. And the Briggs Initiative in California at the time, which tried to enable school boards to fire any teacher who was LGBT. So those injustices were, were so outrageous then, less so now certainly, but they do exist. I mean, in certain rural areas, I'm sure there are still attempts to curtail the rights of LGBT people.
Well, and I'd like to add to that a little bit too. I mean, I think a lot of people thought, well, we have gay marriage now, so the fight's over and everything like that.
Right.
And here we had the largest hate crime in American history towards the LGBTQ community and people of color, and there are a lot of people in this community trying to whitewash that and make that go away. And it did happen to us. Yeah. And it did happen because of hatred and injustice, and that we still have work to do.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. I think just how doing this project informed the world to me, something that really upset me was certainly the Muslim ban. And I found myself going down to, I live in Boston, going down to Logan Airport on the night of the ban, and I didn't bring my camera, but I had my phone and I was filming, and I was like, am I here to film this or am I here to protest? And I think I decided I was there to protest. But I'd like Porg to just mention something he's doing, because he's doing something that I think is really unique to that. Porg, do you want to talk about GAME? GAME?
Yes, this might be of interest to people. 2 years ago, traveling across Europe, I became aware of the very deep stigmatization of young Muslims, no matter where they came from. So I set up an organization called GAME, and it's really, I won't say what it is. It's an organization that brings together young Muslims from the most deprived areas in all the major European cities that have existential problems with Muslims. So this is divided into two parts. We had a conference in 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, where we brought together 2 community workers from London, a neighborhood in London, Manchester, Brussels, Paris, Rome, Berlin, Sarajevo, Tirana, and Mitrovica, and Lebanon, and Tripoli in Lebanon. And we brought them together to set up an agenda for an October conference. They will go back to their communities and select 6 young people, and we will bring them to a second conference where we will engage them in activities that will give meaning and purpose to their lives, so that they can say, my life matters, I mean something. Even though I may be unemployed, that does not mean that I am not somebody. And we are having them drawing up a charter of rights for stigmatized young Muslims that will include a clause that says we, as the young Muslims of these 11 different cities, are committed to the use of nonviolence for the achievements of our goals and aspirations. And we will then set them up as an advocacy group, different advocacy groups that will go out into their communities and their cities and then move around their countries, creating a movement of young Muslims committed to nonviolence. And that conference is in October. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of you. Those were great questions. But please, let's give a hand to Joyce Chen, Emily Moore, Barry Sandler, Amanda Bailey, Porig, James Demo, E.G. Bailey, amazing films, all. And the films, again, are Refugee, 8 Borders, 8 Days, Peacemaker, and New Neighbors. Please make sure you see them. Thank you so much.